Welcome to Byte-Sized Agency Briefs, a webinar series that packs a ton of important agency information on one topic from one expert into a 25-minute brief. Why 25 minutes? Because who has the attention span for much more these days? And you can squeeze in a listen between meetings with time for a bathroom break or coffee refill before your next meeting.
Thanks for tuning in. This is Byte-Sized Agency Briefs. I'm your host, Steve Guberman from Agency Outside, where I coach agency owners to build the agency of their dreams. I'm so excited to be here talking with Nikki Rausch from Sales Maven today. Nikki, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. It's so good to get to spend this time with you.
Yay, this is cool. So I want to jump right in, and I think what you do, and we'll leave it with what you do for now, but what you do has so much value to different businesses, but we're talking about agencies today. So talk about Sales Maven, what you do, and how you got into what you're doing.
Yeah, so Sales Maven is a company that provides sales training, and I really specialize in the conversation of sales. So, teaching people how to have a structure and a strategy to a sales conversation so that they seamlessly guide somebody from that initial conversation to the place where we actually exchange dollars for services or product.
Hmm.
And I work with people in a couple different ways. I do private coaching, I do classes, I have a membership. But as far as agency owners, a lot of times what they're bringing me in for is to teach their team that are customer facing how to like add on sales,
Hmm.
how to move somebody that's on a small retainer to a bigger retainer, and how to do all that really easily that doesn't come across pushy and aggressive. It's all this idea of like, can we teach your team how to create curiosity so that people want to know more, so they're asking questions? And so that's me. That's what I do.
Oh, I love that. So what's your backstory? How'd you get into this?
So my backstory is I come from a corporate sales background. I had a lot of success in the tech industry
Hmm.
for many years. I was a top producing rep in North America for one of the bigger companies in the world, and um, the traveling sales rep that was going like I always joke that this is not actually a joke, but my airline, I used to fly so much that my airline used to send me a Christmas gift.
Wow.
So like I was the total traveling road warrior. And while I was having a successful sales career, I also started studying neurolinguistic programming. And
Hmm.
so that's a new term to anybody listening. It's really the study of communication. And I initially started studying NLP because I thought it would teach me how to be a better salesperson from the aspect of relationship first, building strong rapport. And it definitely improved my sales skills. But what it really did was made me a better communicator, which then improved all the relationships in my life. And
Hmm.
so now what I do is I bring my corporate sales background, combine it with my NLP experience, and that's what I teach people is how to have more effective conversations, how to have more influence in a conversation, and how to guide people kind of through a process so that it feels easy, not just for you as the seller, but easy for the buyer
Hmm.
to be in that conversation with you.
So you say guide, and to me
Mhm.
that means that you're almost alluding to the fact that the person selling might be in control of the process.
I would want them to be in control of the process. Now, I will say that I do think sales to me is something that you do with people,
Hmm.
not to them, because I think one of the misconceptions out there is that sales is manipulative and it's one of those things like, you got to convince people to buy from you. And I do not buy into that mentality at all.
Right.
I think that sales is something that you do with people.
Hmm.
And the way you do with conversation is you learn how to ask really strategic questions. You know kind of where you are in the process, and you know what's the next logical step and how to get there, and issue invitations so that the person who's in conversation with you feels really seamless in the process. The worst thing that can happen is somebody's in a sales conversation and they expect the prospect to know what to do or say next.
Right.
That's not the prospect's job, that's your job. And it's your job to guide. And when you guide, and I say guide rather than lead, because lead feels like I'm dragging you behind me
Right.
and I'm going like, come on, come on, come on. But guide is just like, hey, is this the right next step for us? Should we do this next thing? And then the person gets to decide, yeah, let's do this next thing together.
Is the guide also somewhat more subconsciously pulling, like, I'm picturing, like, two people in the woods, like, hey, we should go over there, and the buyer, quote unquote, is like, oh yeah, that sounds like you're influencing me to go over there. Is it an
Yeah.
influential thing, or is it like,
Yeah.
okay, and
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's kind of this, so there's in NLP there's something known as pacing and leading.
okay,
And one of the big mistakes that people often make in a sales conversation is they try to just go right into the lead. But, imagine standing, on the side of the street and somebody you don't know comes up to you and grabs you by the wrist and says like, "Follow me." You're probably going to pull your wrist away and be like, "Who are you?
yeah,
Why?" But if they come up and they pace you first and they kind of figure out where you are and what your style is, and they're willing to adjust their own style, then when they say, "Hey, would you be willing to, walk over here with me?" You're probably more likely to be like, "Yeah, sure, let's go."
yeah,
So that's what I mean by guide is you have to pace first before you try to lead. And in any conversation in sales, I think there has to be a balance of power.
hmm,
So you can't be the person who's like, this is all about me. We're going to do it my way. You're going to do what I say because the client frankly will go somewhere else because they'll be like, I don't like this, you know, opportunity here, or I don't like how this is coming across. But if they hold all the power, if you give your client all the power or a prospect in a conversation, they'll abuse it.
yeah.
That's just human nature. And they won't treat you like a peer, like this is a collaborative experience, and it should be. So there needs to be a balance of power. You don't give all the power to the client and you don't try to take all the power for yourself either.
And I think establishing that early on is essential for once you're engaged, you've already established this is how the relationship's going to work best. Where so many, engaged relationships, client partnership relationships are abusive because it's probably starts in that pre-sale, just choppy relationship and treating each other poorly and not knowing how to respect each other and not knowing how to ask the right questions, like you were saying. Once you get into the work that you're doing, so many agencies are like, oh, this client is so abusive, and you should have seen that way long ago, red flags all over the place, and tapped out. So
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you said that. Yes, you should have tapped out.
yeah,
I think in business, it's really important to understand that not everybody makes for a good client. And
yeah,
it is absolutely okay to what I call bless and release. If I get a sense of talking to somebody and I think this person is going to be impossible to coach, or, every once in a while I get people who just want to prove to me how good they are at sales.
yep,
So they want to negate everything I say. Well, if that's the case, like good for them. I will salute and honor that you're really good at sales, but I have nothing to contribute here. Therefore, I'm not going to waste time and energy
yeah,
trying to, have somebody be open to actually being coached. So in that case, I'm going to bless and release and do it as quickly as possible so
hmm,
as to not waste their time, but also not waste mine. My time is valuable just like theirs.
yeah, yeah. I'm the same way. My red flag is typically ego, because I
Mm,
don't feel like somebody's going to be open minded to the guidance that I can offer them if they come in knowing how great their agency is already doing. And if it's doing so great, maybe you should save the money that you would invest in working with me also. And I don't know. I'd rather work with people where we can make great strides together than just have another agency on my roster. It's not worth it to me. So yeah, I fully
yeah.
get that. You talk a lot about relationship selling versus traditional sales. Talk about what is that and how to, kind of how do people jump into that side of sales as opposed to knocking on doors and trying to, shove a vacuum in somebody's face.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a big fan of cold calling,
Hmm,
so I think you have to learn how to warm up your cold calls. Now, again, I come from a corporate background. Believe me, I've dialed for dollars like nobody's business,
hmm,
so I understand the concept of cold calling. I just think in our day and age and where we are, people are just getting bombarded
hmm,
with it, and so it can be less than effective. I also kind of refer to it as it's like the shotgun approach to sales, which, you all know because you probably got 5, 10, 20 emails today of people who, you have no idea who they are, and they're just showing up in your inbox or showing up in a voicemail to you,
Yep.
trying to sell you on something that you're like, I never even indicated I was interested in this.
Yeah.
So, warming up your calls, I think, are really important. And one of the easiest ways to warm up a call, which is also one of the ways that people tend to go to last, but yet it's the most effective, is to really utilize your network, utilize the people who know you, who believe in you, who understand the value that you bring to the table, and ask them to make introductions to the right people on your behalf.
Hmm.
Because when you do that, the person who's making the introduction on your behalf, they already have some level of credibility with the
Yep.
person they're making the introduction for. And so you get to ride the coattails of the credibility, right? Like, this is even how you and I got connected, is
Hmm.
somebody who we both know, I think, and trust and like a lot, said, hey, you guys should get to know each other,
Yes.
right? Now, if I had just shown up in your inbox, you probably would have been like, I don't know this chick. I'm not going to give her the time of day. And because somebody made a connection for us, like, we got to know each other, right? And
Yeah.
now we can have real conversation, because you come in with this, like, hey, I trust this person. They're probably not going to introduce me to somebody who's a total dud.
Yeah.
So I'll give this person some time and a little bit of my attention and see where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And so making, asking people to make introductions on your behalf. Now, there's a way to do it, to ask in a way that doesn't seem schmarmy and weird and awkward. And when you do it effectively, it can be an impactful way to grow business.
Hmm. So, can we get into some of those tactical ways
Mhm.
that we can ask for referrals? Because so many people are
Yeah.
like, I want to ask my current client for a referral. I don't know how or when, or I ask them and they forget, and I don't want to be a pain in the butt. So, whether it's a current client or somebody I know, I want to talk to Susan Jones, and I see, Fred, whatever, his friends, Fred Smith is friends with her. Can I ask Fred for an like, what are the different intro types you've got?
Yeah. So one of the things you want to do, well, I'm going to say the thing you don't want to do is don't send out a broadcast message to everybody in your network
Hmm.
and say, hey, I'm looking to grow my business. Can you introduce me to the people you know?
Right.
Because that is such a generic, kind of request.
Hmm.
And so when you send out messages to everybody, it's kind of like talking to nobody.
Hmm.
And when you send out a generic like request like that, it's kind of like asking people to solve world peace. Like, most people are going to go like, I give up. I'm
Yeah.
out. I don't know what to do with that. So I'm just going to move on. You're not really talking to me. You're talking to everybody. So the thing you want to do first and foremost is be really specific in who you ask.
Hmm.
It needs to be somebody that you do have a real relationship with, that knows you, like, really does know you. And the language that I often use is, I start with, is it okay to ask you for a favor?
Mm.
And the reason I start with it as a question, so I don't just say like, "Hey, I'm looking to grow my business, would you introduce me to blah blah blah?" That is all about me. But if you say, "Is it okay to ask you for a favor?" It's still about me, but most people, even if you say that to them, even before they know what you're going to ask,
Mhm.
they're already like shaking their head like, "Yeah, yeah, you can ask. Yeah, sure, go ahead," right? So you've got permission right there by asking for the
Yeah.
favor. And then you need to be really specific in what you're asking for. So don't ask them to, do you know anybody that does blah, blah, blah? Because do you know anybody is a yes or no answer.
Mhm.
So instead, in best case scenarios, say, I see that on LinkedIn you're connected to Susan. I think you said Susan. And, I'm wondering, would you be willing to introduce us? And the reason for the introduction is, and it has to be for Susan's benefit in some way. It
Right.
can't just be like, the reason is because I really want to get some business out of her, because nobody's going to want to do that for you. So make it
That's not a
specific.
valid ask? Darn.
Right. No, something specific. Like, I noticed that, Susan is growing her team, and she might be interested in scaling her business as well. And that might entail training her new team members on how to talk about her business and teach them some selling skills. Would you be interested, or would you be willing to make this introduction on her behalf? And then if you need to, you might even need to write up for them like what they could just cut and paste and say,
Mhm.
like, hey, I want to introduce you to my buddy, and this is what Steve does, or this is what Nikki does, or whatever. But the more specific that you can be, the easier it is for people to take action on it. So if you make it really simple and like a really small task,
Mhm.
most people, if they've got rapport with you, are willing to do you a solid. I
Yeah.
mean, you could ask me right now to introduce you to somebody and I'd be like, of course, I'd
Yeah.
be happy to. Right? Like it's that easy. But most people are going like, oh, I don't want to ask people because it feels weird. And maybe they're going to think it's, I'm being self-serving. But realistically, the thing that people often forget is that it actually feels really good to be the person who makes the connection for two people that find value in their relationship.
Yeah.
So even though, the person that you're asking to make the introduction doesn't necessarily get anything out of it, but they do. They get that good feeling of like, oh my gosh, I just connected. I connected Steve and Nikki, which is what our friend can say now. And like, look what happened. They
Yeah.
did a podcast together. They did this or they did that. And they get that good feeling. So don't rob people of having that good feeling. Be willing to ask them and don't just think that they'll
Mhm.
just do it on their own. A lot of times you have to plant that seed because they're busy
Yeah.
and they're not going to think of it on their own. But if you ask, they're much more likely to do it.
Yeah. I love looking back over the past, whatever, 15, 20 years and seeing specific dots in webs of people that I've connected and how those relationships have flourished and expanded. And it just warms my heart. I love it so much. So yeah, I fully agree. The connector is, it makes them look great, especially when you take care of them. And I don't know, I just think it's a great, great thing. What about best time in a relationship? So I win a new client because we've done this really great discovery and onboarding and we started working together. Do I wait till the end of the project? Do I wait till a year into the first retainer? Do I wait till after the first month? What's the best time on that do you think?
The ultimate best time is when they are raving about something you've done. That's actually the best time to ask.
Hmm.
So even if you're, a week in and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you are so responsive. You've been so great. Like we feel so confident in the work that you're going to do for us." That's actually a really good time to ask
Hmm.
because they're at that heightened level of like, "This is amazing." So I think sometimes people wait until the very, very end because they think, well, I can't ask too soon.
Yeah.
But that's actually not true. If you wait until the very, very end, a lot of times they'll forget all the highs, especially if it's a year later, right? They'll forget, like, oh my gosh, a week in, Steve was blowing our minds. 2 months in, he had completely transformed our business. 6 months in, he did this, he did that. A year in, they're like, yeah, he's pretty cool. It's like, wait, no, you forgot about, like, remember how you felt about him a weekend and 2 months in and
Yeah.
6 months in when you were like, dang, look at how our business has changed because of the work that he's done with us. That's actually the best time to ask for a connection and a referral,
So strike while
and
the
an
iron's hot. Don't
introduction.
worry about really
Yeah.
when it actually is, but wait till they're raving fans.
Yeah, you need to do something, right? Like you can't just meet somebody, shake their hand, and they be like, "Hey, can you do me a solid?" That's kind of
Yeah.
rushing through the relationship. So do something to show to demonstrate your expertise, to demonstrate the value that you bring, and most of the time people will acknowledge the value, and then that is the best time to ask.
Yeah. Value is the biggest word there for me. So I love that. What about you mentioned in agency space? One of the things that you do is help what do you say, the customer relationship people expand those accounts without it making seem like they're selling or expanding. What are some of the things that you can talk about there?
So one of the things, so I kind of maybe mentioned this, but it's around teaching your team how to create a little curiosity.
Hmm.
Curiosity is a big thing that I teach, and it's I have a 5-step process for a sales conversation, and it's step 2, and it's the most missed step because most people don't think about, should I create curiosity? Do I know how to create curiosity? So one way is, let's say that you're working with a client and you get a sense that they also might benefit from some other service that you provide.
Hmm.
First of all, don't assume that they know about this other service. Even if you talk to them about it at some
Hmm.
point, don't assume that they remember because they probably don't,
Right.
because it wasn't relevant to them at the time. So if your customer facing person is having a conversation with them, one of the ways that they could plant this, I call it the curiosity seed, they could plant the seed is to say, based on our conversation that we had last time, it got me thinking about something else that you might benefit from.
Mm.
Now, pause and then say, Would you be interested in hearing more about that? Don't just say, it got me it got me thinking about something else we offer. You should do this and you should sign up for this thing and it costs you more money and blah, blah, blah. That's like rushing through the sale. You didn't actually create any curiosity. But by asking if they're open to hearing about it, they're going to lean in and be like, tell me more.
Yeah.
What's that about? Now they're more open to hearing it. So it doesn't sound like a big sales pitch. It sounds like, here's something of potential value for you, because they've given you permission to actually talk about it. So it's really, really important that you train your team on how to do these little plant seeds of curiosity, because it will open the door, for this business. And I'm a big fan of increasing lifetime value of clients
Yes.
and increasing lifetime value of your offers,
Hmm.
because, the best business to earn is repeat business, frankly.
It's also the cheapest business. Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, and I hope you take this as a compliment. The way you phrase that line sounded very much like a line from Boiler Room. If you ever saw
Oh,
that movie with Giovanni
yeah.
Ribisi, because he
Yes.
was just like a ridiculous salesman, and he'd get on the phone and be like, I don't know, it just sounded like similar to a line that he would have thrown out there to close somebody. But and I
I
hold him
like
in
it.
that movie in such high regard, so it's totally a compliment.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you. I'll take it as such.
but so people that are account managers dealing directly with clients, building those relationships on behalf of the agency. I mean, that's not a thing. You can't create that curiosity on every update call, on every status call, on even every quarterly call. Typically it's maybe twice a year, or once a year when the account is in review again. You can talk about these kinds of things. Is there a cadence or frequency when these kinds of conversations should be having had?
Well, I do think it is something that you can plant some seeds a few times throughout the year. So
Hmm.
even if you're like, well, we're not really up for review, one of the other ways that you can do this that is just, again, it's just like planting a seed, is, let's say for instance the client asks a question about something.
Hmm.
Now, one of the things that we train our people to do is, like, you get a question, you give an answer. Yet, you can actually do one other thing instead. You're still going to give the answer, but this is in addition to giving the answer. So instead of just giving the answer, you could say, that's actually something that we do for our clients that are in the higher level retainer package. If you're ever interested, I'm happy to chat with you about it. But here's the answer. So you just planted the seed of, like,
Hmm.
hey, there's another level, or there's a way for you to get this, or whatever that is. Don't be afraid to do that when you get asked questions, because again,
Mm.
it may not just like turn the light bulb on for them necessarily right then in the moment, but it is something that then when you bring it back up when you're about to renew the contract, now they're like, oh, this isn't the first time they're hearing about it. And
Right.
so people have what's known as a convincer strategy. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
No.
So, a convincer strategy, we all have it, and it's all context specific. So, in certain areas of your life, you might be the kind of person, like, you hear about something one time and you're like, I'm in. Or there's other areas of your life where you're like, the first time you hear about it, you go, nah, not for
Hmm.
me. And then you hear about it again, or you see something again and you go, yeah, I don't really understand why anybody would want that. And then, again, depending on your convincer strategy, at some point you might start to go, maybe I should be thinking about that, because this keeps coming up. Like, maybe there's a reason keeps coming up. And then pretty soon you're like, I totally am going to buy that thing. I mean, this is why you get shown the same ads over and over and over again on social media, is because they understand that there's something called a convincer strategy. So it's not your job to convince people, but it is your job to continue to try to reach their convincer
Yeah.
strategy and let them decide for themselves. So you don't necessarily always want that, at the contract renegotiation, for that to be the first time they're hearing about something. You want to have planted those seeds a few times, because now they might be much more open to hearing about it because you've planted some seeds along the way.
Yeah. Ooh, that's huge. I love that. And I feel like that's a thing that I've definitely done over the years. But the way you frame it, it's like brand new positioning right there. And I don't know that I've ever heard that phrase of convincer strategy. But yeah, I love that. That's amazing. I want to spend the next, I don't know, minute before we jump off, totally shift gears, jump into some random, not so random, rapid fire questions. So,
Okay.
real quick, what's a big takeaway you had from 2022 that you carried into 2023? A big change for you?
I think the biggest change for me was realizing how honestly to utilize my team better
Mm.
and that I really needed to up my leadership skills. That
Ooh,
was
I love
my
that.
big, like, yeah,
Yeah.
big takeaway for me in
What
2022.
what is a book, podcast, audiobook, or show or something that you just can't get enough of today?
Well, okay. So this is this is not business related, but it's the
Good.
Smartless podcast.
Oh,
Have you heard about the Smartless podcast? I
binge
love
it
it so
regularly.
much.
I love them.
I I love it so much.
Mhm.
I just find it to be one of the most entertaining things out there today.
Yeah. So after everybody
Yeah.
listens to this, tune into Smartless, but only after you hear Nikki's podcast and my podcast through and through. Nikki, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us, and for everybody that's listening, check out the show notes. Nikki has specific content just for agency owners for sales strategies. Is that it? An ebook?
Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, it's I have a little mini training that talks through my 5 steps of the sales conversation. So
Awesome.
you can get it. And it's really mastering the sales conversation is what the training's about. You can let your team watch it. You can watch it and you can get it for free just by going to yoursalesmaven.com/byte. So that's for and it's
Awesome.
BYTE for your audience.
Great. Nikki, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in to Byte-Sized Agency Briefs. As always, if you found value in this episode, chances are someone else will too, so please share it with your network. Also, if you know someone with expert knowledge on a topic that agency owners would love, drop me a note. Let's get them on. Finally, find someone to hug today.